Well, I'm very pleased to welcome a special guest on the news grid, Ahmet Davutoglu. He was the Prime Minister of Turkey. He also served as the Minister of Foreign Affairs and as Chief Advisor to the then Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who's now, of course, the President of Turkey. Thank you so much for taking the time to visit us here on the news grid. There's so much to talk about, of course, when it comes to the situation in the region. I want to begin with Iraq. And Turkey and Iraq agree on removing ISIL, of course, out of Iraq. But that's about the only thing they agree on. The Iraqis don't want Turkish troops involved in the battle for Mosul, which your government is very keen on having. What is your position? What is your view on the situation? Should Turkey be involved in the fight to liberate Mosul?
Yes.
And what would Turkey bring to the table?
Yes. First of all, thank you very much for this program. I visited Baghdad after I became Prime Minister, and I welcomed Prime Minister Ibadi to Turkey for our high-level Strategic Cooperation Council meeting. In all these meetings, we agreed to work shoulder to shoulder against terrorism.
Right.
In today's world, especially regarding terrorism, borders are getting less and less significant because they are crossing borders. A terrorist threat against Iraq means a terrorist threat against Turkey.
Right.
So Turkish presence in Iraq.
There is already a Turkish presence in northern Iraq. There's some 500 or so troops in northern Iraq. But as you know, the Iraqis are not very happy about that presence.
Not Iraqis. Iraqi government has some concerns. Right. But Iraqis, when we come to Iraqis, you can ask people of Mosul whether they want Turkey or not, or Erbil or Kirkuk, or even other parts of Iraq. So here important is we have two goals, our presence there. I was Prime Minister when Bashika base was established, and the purpose was clear. First, fighting against ISIL together with Iraqi forces, not against Iraqi forces or not against Iraqi government. ISIL is a threat to all of us, and Turkey is the neighboring country feeling this threat directly.
Right.
So Turkey has to be there. Secondly, there is PKK presence, and PKK is trying to get ground as if they are fighting against ISIL. Both ISIL and PKK are national threats against Turkey. So we want to help Iraqi brothers and sisters, and we want to protect our people.
The Iraqi government wants a commitment. They want to see Turkish troops leave northern Iraq if and when ISIL is removed from Mosul. Will that happen? Can the Turkish government agree to that?
Of course, when we talk with them, whenever there is no threat against Turkey or against Iraq by ISIL or by PKK, of course, Turkish presence will not be needed there, and Turkish troops will be back because Turkey, for us, it is risky to be there. But we will be there until the terrorist threat against Iraq and against Turkey continues to survive there. Once Mosul is liberated, once there is no PKK threat against Turkey, of course, Turkey and Iraq will continue to live together side by side as equal partners. We don't want to dominate. We don't have any intention to expand our territory. There is no such a policy of Turkey. We want to help Iraqi brothers and sisters.
Prime Minister Davutoglu, you've told us about Turkey's goals in Iraq. What about Syria? What today is the primary goal for Turkey in Syria? Is it to end the Kurdish PYD presence in places like Kobane, regardless of whether or not Bashar al-Assad remains in power?
The first objective today, not only as former Turkish Prime Minister, but as a human being, for me and for Turkish people, the first goal is to help humanitarian-wise, to help our brothers and sisters in Syria, especially in Aleppo. Today, the last hospital was hit by the regime.
Indeed.
And all of us, we have to be together to help our brothers and sisters, our human beings in Aleppo. This is our humanitarian goal, to help people in Syria. If they come to Turkey, we are helping them 3 million people. Secondly, to make our borders secure from all terrorist groups, ISIL, PKK, or any other terrorist group. So therefore, we made this Jarablus operation to protect our border and to get rid of this terrorist threat. And YPG is a wing of PKK, which is attacking Turkey, so we don't want them to be on our border.
You've talked about the situation in Aleppo, and we are expecting to hear from the UN Humanitarian Chief, Stephen O'Brien, at the Security Council very shortly on the humanitarian needs in Aleppo. We'll, of course, bring that to you live on the news grid. I want to talk to you, though, about what Turkey's actions are likely to be in Syria, especially when it comes to Aleppo, because the Turkish government has said that it would be unacceptable for the government to retake full control of Aleppo. Of course, eastern Aleppo right now is under rebel control. They said that the fall of eastern Aleppo to the government would constitute a red line for Turkey. If that happens, what action would Turkey take? When they say this constitutes a red line, what does that mean?
Yeah, in fact, all international community should act against this type of brutal and barbaric attack against Aleppo. Today, Aleppo is worse than Stalingrad in Second World War, or even almost Srebrenica situation. So UN should act, and Turkish action will be in line with the international community, I am sure. But unilaterally, Turkey has all the right to protect the border as well as to take necessary measures to prevent new waves of refugees. Of course, we will be helping them, but at the same time, we will do all necessary action to stop these massacres and brutality in Aleppo.
We have a question from Twitter, Prime Minister Davutoglu, and Kurt is asking on precisely Syria. Is the war in Syria not the biggest actual threat to Turkey's territorial integrity? And if it is, as you yourself has said, why add to it?
No, in fact, the existing situation in Syria is a threat to Turkish national security as well. So we are trying to help Syrian people, regardless of the ethnic origin, Arabs, Kurds, Turkoman, Muslims, Christians, Sunnis, Shiite, Alevites, and at the same time, we want to protect our national security. That is the reason why Turkey is supporting Free Syrian Army, and in order to get rid of these terrorist actions and groups from our borders.
Please stay with us, Prime Minister Davutoglu. We are going to go to the United Nations Security Council right now because Stephen O'Brien, the UN humanitarian chief, is briefing the Security Council right now about the humanitarian situation in Aleppo, Syria. Let's listen in to what he has to say.
And injuring more than 350 more. Over the weekend, an attack on a school in the Al-Furqan district in western Aleppo with mortar shells and rocket projectile by non-state armed groups reportedly killed 8 children and injured several others, while the local university was also hit. Overall, some 25,000 people have been displaced in western Aleppo in the last few weeks as a result of shelling by non-state armed groups. Let me be clear, we are not just seeing a resumption of violence in Aleppo. This is not business as usual. What has been unleashed on civilians this past week is yet another low in an unrelenting, inhuman onslaught. And it is as heartbreaking as it is not inevitable. These parties to the conflict are, all of them, choosing to do this. It is civilians who pay the price. Mr. President, since July, 275,000 civilians have been trapped in eastern Aleppo due to the siege tactics placed on them by the Syrian government and its allies. Russia and Syria have opened corridors for civilians to leave, but they are reportedly unsafe or perceived as unsafe to traverse. There have also been reports that non-state armed groups inside eastern Aleppo prevented those wishing to leave the city from doing so. Humanitarian conditions in eastern Aleppo have gone from terrible to terrifying and now barely survivable by human beings. On 13th November, the last of the available WFP food rations were distributed. Pre-positioned before UN access was cut off in July, rations were drawn out as long as possible, but now they are gone. Only a handful of rations from local NGOs remain, food in markets is scarce, and prices have skyrocketed. Fuel and gas to cook food is reportedly unavailable in most neighborhoods. This is resulting in negative coping strategies, reducing meals and restricting diets to feed children. And along with limited food and medicine, there has been growing discontent, with protests against corruption and a monopoly on goods reported last week, some of which did turn violent, indicating the extreme desperation of the trapped citizens. And to add to the humanitarian crisis, they will shortly face a harsh winter without heating or the bare essentials for life. The UN has employed significant and tireless efforts to deliver life-saving aid. I yield to no one in saluting the undiluted, selfless bravery of all humanitarian aid workers across the United Nations, the international NGOs, the NGOs locally, first responders and people in their communities and families. Time and again, if not themselves a victim this time, out they go, even at risk of the cynical second follow-on airstrike or shell or sniper's bullet deliberately aimed at them, searching for life and life-saving. Let us repeat, they are not a target. And I urge the government of Syria to give the Secretary-General's Board of Inquiry into the attack on the humanitarian convoy that resulted in the death of aid workers on the 19th of September at Al-Kabir full access in Syria to conduct its investigations. Our teams in Damascus and Gaziantep have presented plan after plan to all sides, working to ensure delivery of medical supplies and evacuation of the most urgent medical cases. We stand ready to move the moment security guarantees by all parties are granted. The UN four-point plan presented last week to all parties includes critical medical evacuations and delivery of medical supplies. It includes the provision of food and other essential relief items. Finally, it includes the rotation of doctors to provide assistance to those in need. The 30 medical doctors left in eastern Aleppo city, exhausted from their heroic efforts and non-stop work from July, continue to serve in unrelentingly traumatic circumstances. All parties have the plan, and we have been engaging in unremitting discussions to obtain their agreement to proceed. But the restart of intense fighting is a clear setback to our goal of reaching agreement and delivering to those in need. Yet we are not deterred. Despite the bombing and whatever the difficulty, we are determined to follow through. The UN's humanitarians and our partners will not give up on the people of Aleppo. We will continue to insist on the parties' obligations to respect international humanitarian law and human rights law, and to see sustained humanitarian assistance delivered to those in eastern Aleppo and all who are in need throughout Syria. I call on all with influence. That's the phrase I am diplomatically required to use. But you know around this table and beyond who you are, to do their part to end these senseless cycles of violence once and for all, to put an end to the slaughterhouse that is Aleppo. All sides, and those with influence over them, must immediately provide the necessary guarantees for the humanitarian four-point plan to move ahead.
We've been listening there to the UN humanitarian chief, Stephen O'Brien, briefing the Security Council about the humanitarian situation in Syria, specifically, I should say, in Aleppo, where, as he said, some 275,000 people remain trapped inside rebel-held eastern Aleppo with no aid whatsoever coming to them. Stephen O'Brien calling on members of the Security Council gathered there. And by the way, the Syrian ambassador to the UN on that table there, calling on them to make sure that the hostilities stop and that aid is provided to the people of Aleppo. With us on the News Grid today, we're very pleased to welcome Turkey's former Prime Minister Ahmet Davutoglu. And of course, you can be part of the conversation. Send your questions on facebook.com/AJ Newsgrid. If you have questions for the Prime Minister on the situation in Iraq as well as Syria, of course, and also in Turkey, do send them to us, and we will, of course, relay those questions to the former Prime Minister of Turkey. Coming back to Syria, I want to ask you about what you think the way forward is. We heard there from Stephen O'Brien, who talked about a very desperate situation. The president of Turkey earlier today again called for a no-fly zone to be established over Syria. Northern Syria specifically. Do you think that will solve the situation?
Yes, but before that, I want to salute all people in Aleppo who are trying to survive for their dignity. Our hearts are with them. But as our president said, and as we have been saying for the last 3 years, there should be a no-fly zone because this is collective punishment. The airplanes are attacking.
But it's very, very unlikely that the Security Council will agree to a no-fly zone.
Unfortunately, because of Russian veto. And I think Syrian regime wants to misuse this transition in the United States. During that era, they want to make a de facto situation on the ground, and they want to do all the massacres, hoping that nobody will raise the voice. But I am calling from here all responsible statesmen, leaders, all opinion makers everywhere in the world we have to raise our voice. What is going on in Syria is terrible, but what is going on in Aleppo right now, when we are talking on Aleppo, is really beyond imagination, a barbaric action. I am sure those who are responsible for this barbaric action will be questioned in the future.
Prime Minister Davutoglu, I want to move on and ask you now about the situation in your country, Turkey, and your assessment of Turkey post the July coup. There is, of course, concern internationally that the Turkish government has been using the coup as a pretext to crack down on dissent. Every day we hear on the news of arrests being made, journalists being arrested, media outlets being shut down. There is concern internationally that Turkey is not respecting human rights. As a former prime minister, how does that make you feel, this international criticism, and also the fact that Turkey's reputation today is almost in tatters?
I think we may have different political approaches, but we have to agree certain principles, like in Aleppo, for example, or in Syria, or in the case of coup d'etat in Turkey. All of us, we have to agree that humanitarian access to people in Syria is necessary.
But I'm talking about the situation.
I am coming.
Right.
And all of us, we have to work for that. Like in the case of Turkey, all of us first, we have to condemn coup d'etat attempt in a democratic country against an elected president, bombarding parliament building, bombarding people, and killing 241 people in the streets,
right,
and injuring 2,500.
But the concern again is that the crackdown has gone too far.
It is who is judging on what ground. It is not a pretext. We should not forget that, of course, Turkey is a country of rule of law, and everybody must respect to rule of law. If there is anything beyond these rule of law regulations, there are mechanisms in Turkey through judicial mechanisms and even through European Court of Human Rights. Everybody has the right to use this.
Right.
But first of all, international community and all democratic leaders, countries, should support Turkey against this coup d'etat, which was one of the most brutal action in the modern history against a people.
As you know, a lot of people have difficulty understanding that as many as 36,000 people have been arrested in Turkey as a result of this coup.
Yep, because this group who organized this coup, they have been infiltrating to all bureaucracy.
Right.
And it is a network. It is not just a military group. It is a network of bureaucracy. I don't mean that there may be some people who have been affected negatively. But important is, as a former prime minister and as a human being, as an academician, we have to talk for rule of law and democratic principles.
Okay, I have one last question for you, because of course, as a result of this coup and the crackdown that ensued, relations between Turkey and the European Union have been strained. Turkey, of course, has been trying to join the European Union for the last 11 years, and the accession talks seem to be in jeopardy today when you listen to many European countries. And we have a question here from Graham on Twitter, who is asking, why did you work so hard for EU accession, you yourself, when the EU works so hard to keep Turkey out?
Last year, exactly 1 year before, 28th of November, we had Turkey-EU summit, and I was in that summit representing Turkey. And we organized 3 summits, and we made an agreement on 18th of March based on 3 principles: working together against refugee crisis, and fortunately now there is no refugee dying in Aegean Sea or on Turkish borders. So it has been a success. Now we expect visa liberalization as well as updating custom union should be on track. And we agreed to have a leaders summit every 6 months. It is now time for Turkey and EU to talk together, rather to open the dialogue, to continue
so
to
no
have dialogue.
pivot to the east, as President Erdogan has been calling for?
No, it's just not President Erdogan, and I am sure he is ready to talk to anybody. Same for those who are now preparing a bill in European Parliament to suspend accession process of Turkey. This is, I am calling them as well. So based on the agreement which we agreed last year, we should come together, and our government, our president, European leaders should talk about the future of our relations. EU needs Turkey and Turkey needs EU. In such a turmoil, in Syria and everywhere in the world. Turkey and EU should have a dialogue channel like what we had last year, and I am calling European leaders to open these channels and have more dialogue with Turkish government, with our president, so that things will be on the table to be shared and to be solved, other than not threatening or not taking certain decisions in European Parliament. I hope there will be such a channel being opened, like last year what we had, and I hope Turkey and EU will work together for our common future.
Prime Minister Davutoglu, thank you so very much for joining us here on The Grid. As you can imagine, there are lots of questions coming from our viewers, and you can continue asking the Prime Minister your questions on our Facebook page, facebook.com/AJ News. He will be joining our Jamal Al-Shayel at 1700 GMT to take in more of your questions about the situation in Turkey, of course, but also in neighboring Iraq and Syria. Thank you so much for being on the News Grid.